As we come this morning to the most difficult chapter, I believe, of Revelation so far. And next week it'll probably be the most difficult chapter of Revelation so far. They don't get any easier from here. Revelation 11 puts us at the midpoint. Midpoint in the book chronologically, but also midpoint in the time of the tribulation, the time of Jacob's troubles, the time where we see havoc wreaked on the world, the judgment of God coming to the world. We've studied about this over and over again as we've gone through this. And as we come to this difficult chapter, I have to reiterate, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again, I'm sure, there are many things in Revelation that we can't be completely dogmatic about. There are so many things in Revelation that we can be sure of, but many things are open to some interpretation. One reason is because they haven't happened yet. So we can't be positively sure about everything that's going on here. We can't be dogmatic about everything. I teach a certain perspective because I believe that's the one that's true. If I didn't, I wouldn't teach it. I think I'm in good company on that. But there are also a lot of people that I highly regard, highly respect as great theologians, much smarter than me, who have a different view. And we can be okay with that. You know, the great thing about something like this is we're not talking about an issue of salvation. We're talking about an issue of interpretation, of understanding. And I've said this again and again. I don't want you to believe something because it's what I believe. I don't want you to believe something because it's what I say. I want you to believe it because it's what the Bible teaches. I want this to drive you deeper into Scripture. And again, there are things in here that I'm probably wrong about. There are things in here that you're going to disagree with me with. And we can be okay with that. We can disagree on things and we can go to heaven together. Praise the Lord. We can disagree on these things and we can be friends. We can disagree on these things and we can worship in the same congregation together. We can have these conversations. I heard somebody say one time that the millennial kingdom is 1,000 years of peace that Christians can't quit arguing about. We don't want to do that, okay? We can have disagreements. We can have misunderstandings. I'm sure we do. If I knew where they were, I'd fix them. But I can't teach all there is to know in 45 minutes about a chapter of Scripture that's this in depth. So I'm qualifying all this by saying, I want you to go do your own research. I don't want to teach you what to think. I want to teach you how to learn. I want to teach you how to study so that God can reveal this to you in His timing. This might bring you into a closer relationship with Him so that you'll know Him on a deeper level. That's our goal here. This morning, I have to humble myself because as I studied through this, and if I'm honest, when I started this, I thought I had it all figured out. But the further I go, the more I realize I don't have it all figured out. So I have to humble myself. I realize that my abilities are completely inadequate to be able to teach you what's here. But I have to do my best because that's my job, right? So understand, there's going to be times when I say, I think this is what this means, or I believe this, or whatever it might be. Let that be a cue for you to go and study this yourself. Dig deeper. Don't believe something because somebody tells you it's true. So as we go through this morning, moving forward, know that there's things that I don't understand, but that's okay. We can be okay with that. I hope that over time, and I believe that He will, that God's going to reveal the complete truth to me. You know, and He will to you as well, because when we see Him, when we see Jesus, we will fully know Him as we're fully known. We'll be like Him. And until that time, we're not going to know everything. And we can be okay with that. So a few things before we start this morning, and I've talked about this before, but now's a good time to have a reminder of this. There are different views of how to interpret this book. I teach what I believe is the biblical view. Some of you are going to hold a different view and believe that that's a biblical view. That's okay. As long as we believe that the Bible is true and it's the Word of God. I don't use a lot of theological terms here, and that's okay. But some things that you may have heard before, some things that you might want to know more about, just in case somebody ever asks you, you might know. And these words are not in the Bible, it's just words that theologians use to describe certain beliefs. And my view is one of what's called dispensationalism and premillennialism. Now, all that means, fancy words, is that I believe that God holds a distinct difference between the church and Israel. That's what dispensationalism means. There's a lot deeper wormhole you can go on that. Premillennialism is a word that means that I believe that Jesus is going to return to earth before the 1,000-year reign, the millennial kingdom. That's what those two things mean. Amillennialism means that people believe that Jesus is going to return sometime during that 1,000 years. And it may not be a literal 1,000 years. It may be a longer period of time. And then postmillennialism is the next step, that Jesus will return after that. And those are views that people I highly respect, people way smarter than me, hold. But I'm just telling you where my view comes from. And people get very heated over this. They like to argue over these things. And I understand holding to your convictions. You should hold to your convictions. You should study the Bible. You should know what you believe, and you should have a good reason for believing it. But we can hold these different things and still be friends and still worship together and still all go to heaven together. That's great. My point is that we may disagree on some stuff that's taught here about Revelation, and those are conversations that we love to have. But it's not an issue of salvation. We're not talking here about understanding that Jesus came and lived. He was fully God and fully man. He lived the life that we couldn't live and died for our sins because we deserved the judgment of God. And He rose 3 days later. That's not what we're talking about. We have to believe that. That is a solid first-tier tenet of being a Christian. We have to believe that. We have to believe in things like salvation by grace and not through works. There's no room for latitude on that. But here we have a little bit of room. Martin Luther, the reformer, even said that we shouldn't even study Revelation because nobody can understand it. And the further I go, I'll start to agree with him a little bit. But no, John said that blessed is the one who reads the words of this book, and we should read the words of this book, and we should study it. But this morning, I'm the one with a microphone, so you have to listen to what I have to say. Revelation chapter 11, and we're going to get as far as we can get. I'm not going to make any promises. And we'll pick it up next week where we leave off. Revelation 11, let's look at the first 3 verses to start us off. Then I was given a measuring rod like a staff, and I was told, rise and measure the temple of God, and the altar of those who were, and the altar and those who worship there. But do not measure the court outside the temple. Leave that out. For it is given over to the nations, and they will trample the holy city for 42 months. And I will grant authority to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. We'll stop there. No one can make as much commotion as my children, I promise. There is no distractions here. There are no distractions here. My grammar. Okay, so we're going to stop right there. Look at these first 3 verses. Here we see John given a measuring rod or staff, or your version may say a reed. And what this is, it's nothing that we need to spend a whole lot of time on, but the word reed is used a lot in Scripture. It's talking about a long, basically stiff stick of grass that would have grown in the water. That could have been 10 feet tall, very thick, very hardy, used for a walking staff. That's why it's used here, used as a rod, used as a measuring stick, all kinds of different things as a hardy piece of vegetation that John is given here, and he's given an instruction. And again, we see John involved in all this. This is not just John being Ebenezer Scrooge, and seeing everything that's going on and not being involved in it, like in the Christmas Carol. This is John being part of the story. Remember, he was given the little scroll. Eat the scroll. It'll be bitter in your stomach and it'll be sweet in your mouth like honey. He's involved in it. And we've seen so many things happen up to this point. We've seen all kinds of hell break loose on earth. We've seen half of the population of the world be destroyed. We've seen demons coming out of the pit. We've seen locusts stinging people for 5 months and them begging to die and not being able to die. 200 million in an army coming And now we find ourselves in the midpoint. This is what we call a parenthetical chapter. This is a chapter that is a parenthesis, that describes stuff that's been going on. And we find ourselves here at the very, very midpoint. And we'll see why in a minute. But we're between the blowing of the 6th and the 7th trumpets. John is given this reed, I'm going to call it a reed, and he's told, rise and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship there. So he's told to measure. Now, we don't know how long the rod is, so it's obviously not important, but he's told to measure. John's given this reed and told to measure the temple. Now, a red flag should go up when you hear that word, because today, and in the time that John wrote this, there was no temple. Even today, there is no temple in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount. On the Temple Mount, the Dome of the Rock sits there, which is a Muslim temple, and is the second, I believe, I'm not 100% on this, I believe it's the second most holy Muslim site in the world, is the Dome of the Rock sitting on the Temple Mount, where the temple would have to be. But here, John is told to go and measure the temple and the altar and those who worship there. So he's told to measure these things. Now, you've probably heard people say that a temple has to be rebuilt before this time can come. Okay, well, we see a temple here, that makes sense. But if you'll remember, before Solomon built the temple, they had the tent tabernacle that they carried with them while they were wandering in the wilderness. A temple can be set up in a matter of days. It doesn't have to be the giant cornerstone covered in gold and all the things we saw Solomon and Zerubbabel and Herod, these giant massive, that doesn't have to be that. It just has to have the elements of the temple. So don't sit back and look in Jerusalem for the cornerstone to be laid and them start digging and say, okay, the time is coming. Don't look for that. Then that may happen, but probably not. Because what we're looking at here, in my view, is that we've seen now the Antichrist make this pact with Israel that they're allowed to restart sacrificing grain offering in their temple. And for them to do that, they have to have a temple. So when that pact is signed, they could stick a temple up and start back immediately. So that's probably what we see going on here. So don't look for these things to happen in the way that you might have heard historically, because it doesn't necessarily have to happen that way. In the day John wrote this, there was no temple. It was destroyed in AD 70 by Vespasian, the emperor, and we all know that story. And today there's no temple. The Dome of the Rock sits there. But Daniel 9 tells us about how the reinstitution of sacrifice in the temple begins. And we looked at this in the past, but we can look at it quickly again. Daniel 9, starting I believe in verse 24, he's going to talk about this. And I've said before, you can't understand Revelation without having some understanding of Daniel. Verse 24. 70 weeks are decreed about your people in your holy city to finish the transgression and put an end to sin and atone for iniquity and to bring everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint the most holy place. Know therefore and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming of an anointed one, so from the time the word goes out, that it's okay to rebuild the temple until the coming of the anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks. Then for 62 weeks, it shall be built again. So for 62, and it's not weeks, it's 62 7-year periods, there's going to be, after the time that the moats and the walls and everything are finished, until the coming of the Messiah, there's going to be 62 7-year periods. And we talked about that as like 173,880 days or something like that. And if you could put it on a calendar from the time that was finished until Palm Sunday, until Jesus walked in Jerusalem, it was to the day. Just as prophecy was fulfilled. And remember when Jesus walked in, he said, if you don't let them praise me, and remember they were laying down the palm branches in front of him, all praising his name. If you don't let them do that, the rocks are going to cry out. And he told Israel, if you had known that this day was for you, then you would be saved. It was for that day. It was specific. And after 62 weeks, verse 26, an anointed one shall be cut off. So he's going to be killed and shall have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city, the prince who is to come, not Jesus, the people, the Gentiles of the one who is the Antichrist, shall destroy the city of Jerusalem and the sanctuary, and its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war, desolations are decreed, and he shall make a strong covenant, and here's the covenant, with the many for 1 week, and one seven-year period, and for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. So for half of the week, for half of the time, there's sacrifice and offering, and the only way there can be legitimate sacrifice and offering is if there's a temple. So, but halfway through, Daniel tells us, he's going to put an end to it. It's going to be over. And on the wings of abomination shall come one who makes desolate until the decree is poured out on the desolator. So the abomination, he's going to seat himself in the temple, declare himself to be God. That is the abomination. There's going to be sacrifices made to him as a God. That makes the temple desolate. And that is the prophecy that we see here and then what we see fulfilled now in the midpoint of Revelation. So John's given this measuring rod. He's given this staff. And he says, measure these things out. Now, when you measure something out, it's like a survey. I mean, this is an area of land, right? He's measuring this out like a survey for the possession of God. We see that throughout the Old Testament. God tells his prophets or his leaders to measure these things out, and it's for his possession. There are two reasons that God measures things. One is for judgment, one is for possession. Now, everything belongs to him, but he's declaring that this is mine. And if it's the temple where sacrifice and offering is going on, he's not measuring this out for judgment. He's measuring because he's leaving the Gentiles out of this. He says that not the court of the Gentiles is not part of it. So he's measuring this out for his possession. He's saying, these are mine. This temple is mine. The altar is mine. And he says, measure the worshipers. Now, that's just saying that these are mine as well. I don't know how you measure people other than in numbers, but he's got a staff, remember? So he's measuring these out for his possession. But he says, but do not measure the court outside the temple. Now, in the Old Testament, the court outside of the temple was called the court of the Gentiles. He says, don't measure that part. They are not mine. But those in the temple are mine. Leave that part out. God saves Gentiles, but he's made no promise to save Gentiles. Romans 11, Paul tells us, lest you be wise in your own sight. I do not want you to be unaware of this mystery. This is 11:25 through 27. Brothers, a partial hardening has come upon Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And in this way all Israel will be saved. As it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion. He will banish ungodliness from Jacob, and he will be my covenant with them when I take away their sins. God made a promise to Israel that they will be saved. But he says, I did not make a promise to the Gentiles. Now, we're part of that. We're Gentiles. Praise the Lord, he let us in. We're grafted in now as part of salvation. But here he's showing his authority and his ownership over the temple and those that are in it. So he says, leave that part out. It is to be given over to the nations being the world. Everybody that's not Israel is the nations. Gentiles, it's the same word. And they will trample the holy city for 42 months. And I will grant authority to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days clothed in sackcloth. Now comes the very, very difficult part. More difficult parts. So he says, leave the part out that's not mine. It's going to be trampled by the Gentiles. Now, up until this point, if you hold to my view here, the Antichrist has made this pact with Israel, and they've been able to sacrifice and grain offering in their temple in relative peace. Now, there's chaos going on all over the world, so I'm sure that they're aware of all the stuff that's going on, but they've been given the ability to do what they want to do pretty much. They can sacrifice in the temple, worship God in the temple the way that they want to, so they're kind of left out of all this. That's why we haven't heard a whole lot about Israel up to this point. It's going to switch pretty much to Israel. You're going to hear a lot more about Israel in the rest of the book. But he says, leave that part out because they're going to be able to trample, the nations are going to be able to trample the holy city for 42 months. Now, that's our cue to know that we're in the middle of this time. This is our cue to know that we're in the same time Daniel was talking about, because Daniel used 1,260 days. He used times time and half a time. Here we see 42 months. What do all those things equal? 3.5 years. 42 months is 3.5 years. On a Jewish calendar, 30 days a month, 30 times 42, 1,260. They mean the same thing. Times time and half a time, we talked about before in Daniel, 3.5 years. They all equal the same time period. That's why I believe we find ourselves right in the middle of this 7-year period. All these times equal. This is the most consistent time period that we see anywhere in Scripture. That it's reiterated over and over and over again is this 1,260 days, it's 3.5 years. And for this, they're going to be able to trample the city of Jerusalem for 3.5 years. So up until this point, Israel's kind of had the run of the place in Jerusalem because of this pact that was made that Daniel told us about in Daniel chapter 9. But he's going to grant authority now. He says, I will grant authority to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. I will grant authority to my 2 witnesses. These are 2 witnesses. The word witnesses, martyrion, is where we get the word martyr from. It doesn't necessarily mean to be killed, but it came to mean that because so many people were killed for their testimony, we kind of use the word martyr to be one who witnessed for Christ and lost their life. So these are 2 witnesses, 2 martyrion, 2 people, 2 men who have authority, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, but they're going to do it, it says, clothed in sackcloth. Now sackcloth, you've probably heard of before, sackcloth and ashes. It's a picture of mourning. Sackcloth is an onion sack, basically. It's the roughest, crudest type of clothing covering that a person might have. And it would be black, because you've heard the term black like sackcloth. We saw that a couple chapters ago, actually. So it would have been a black, rough, coarse material that would barely cover someone, and it was used as a sign of mourning. So these 2 witnesses, they're prophesying for 1,260 days. They're prophesying for 3.5 years, and they're doing it, it seems, not with a message of grace and repentance, but they're doing it clothed in sackcloth. So it would seem that they're prophesying with a message of judgment. So who are these 2 witnesses? Well, as we look a little bit further, we'll see a little bit more about them, but they're not named. And there are books written about who these 2 men are. And there are some crazy ideas out there. One of the ones that came out after 9/11 was that these 2 were the Twin Towers. Now, nothing else matches other than there's 2 of them. That's the only thing that matches that it could be that. And that is a very American way of thinking about things. And we don't want to look at it from that perspective. We want to look at it from a biblical perspective. But some of the ideas about who these 2 men are, one is that they are Elijah and Enoch. Elijah and Enoch. Now, I don't want to go into too much detail because we're running short on time and I don't want to keep you here all day. But Elijah and Enoch, you might be familiar with. Enoch in Genesis says that he walked with God and was not. He didn't die. Basically, what we can figure out, he was raptured, basically. He was taken up to heaven without dying. Elijah, much in the same way, he was carried off in a fiery chariot. No death. And Hebrews tells us that it's appointed to man once to die, and then comes judgment. Well, a lot of people want to say, well, they have to come, and I've heard that before, they have to come back and die. Well, when it says he's appointed man once to die and then comes judgment, Lazarus died twice. So he didn't really get that. And if we believe that God is going to take the church off of the earth, then nobody who's part of the church is going to die then. So we can't really make that a hard and fast rule. It's just a general principle that after you die, judgment comes. That's what that means. Because, again, anybody who was raised from the dead, and Elijah, well, more so Elisha, raised many people from the dead. And they all had to die again. So, you might say that this is Enoch and Elijah for those reasons. Okay, I don't really buy into that theory, but it's a possibility. Another theory is that they are Zerubbabel and Joshua. Now, Zerubbabel was a ruler in the time when the Second Temple was built under Ezra and Nehemiah. Joshua, not Joshua that led the people into the land of the Promised Land, but Joshua who was the high priest during the same time. They were called the olive trees and the lampstands in Zechariah chapter 4. We're not going to go there. But that's what they're called here in Revelation as well. And a lot of people say, well, it's them come back to witness again. But there's some issues with that as well that we don't need to go into. And then finally, the last view is that they are Elijah and Moses. Elijah and Moses. The reasons being that the powers that we see these men have are much like the powers that God gave Moses and Elijah. Moses, remember, was the one who brought plagues on Egypt. He had the power to do that. God gave him the power to do that, and many other things. Elijah, you remember, he called down fire from heaven to destroy the enemies that came against him. He had the power to do that. We see these men kind of having the same powers. You can believe that. You're in pretty good company if you believe that. If I had to pick one, I would lean that direction. Here's the thing, though. If anybody ever wants to argue about who these people are, don't argue with them. You know why? The Bible doesn't tell us. You know why? Because it doesn't matter. So we just spent 10 minutes talking about all the reasons that things don't matter. But it is important that we know that they are two witnesses and that there are different views held here. Whoever it is, they're meant to carry out this purpose. Verse 4, these are the two olive trees. And he's talking about the two witnesses that's going to prophesy for 1,260 days. And they are the two olive trees and the two lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. And if anyone would harm them, fire pours out from their mouth and consumes their foes. If anyone would harm them, this is how he is doomed to be killed. They have the power to shut the sky that no rain may fall during the days of their prophesying. And they have the power over the waters to turn them to blood and to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they desire. And when they have finished their testimony, the beast that rises from the bottomless pit will make war on them and conquer them and kill them. And their dead bodies will lie in the streets of the great city that is symbolically called Sodom and Egypt, where the Lord was crucified for 3.5 days. Some of the people and the tribes and languages, some from the people of the tribes and languages and nations will gaze at their dead body and refuse to let them be placed in the tomb. And those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them and make merry and exchange presents, because these two prophets who have tormented those who dwell on the earth. But after 3.5 days, the breath of life from God entered them, and they stood up on their feet, and great fear fell on those who saw them. Then they heard a loud voice from heaven saying, "Come up here." And they went up to heaven in a cloud, and their enemies watched them. And at the hour there was a great earthquake, and 1/10 of the city fell. 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake, and the rest were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven. The second woe is past. Behold, the third woe is soon to come. So now, these are some interesting characters we see here. So these two, it says, are the olive trees and the lampstands. Again, you can go back to Zechariah chapter 4. Read about that. It gives us a picture of who these two guys are. Again, I don't believe that it's necessarily Zerubbabel and Joshua. Maybe, maybe not. Also, another reason to think it might be Elijah and Moses. One more thing I forgot to mention is when we see Jesus in the Mount of Transfiguration, the two that were with him there were Moses and Elijah. So they stand before the Lord of the earth. These are two men who stand before God. They have been given authority by God. Everything comes from God. And if anyone would harm them, so here's the power that they've been given. If anyone would harm them, fire pours out from their mouth and consumes their foes. That's a good superpower. If I was going to battle, that's the one I would want. If somebody comes after them, and everybody's going to be coming after them. We'll see that in a minute. Fire pours out of their mouth and consumes their foes. Consumes them. They've been given the power to kill their enemies with fire. If anyone would harm them, this is how he is doomed to be killed. So anybody who comes after them, anybody who's going to harm them, they have the power to destroy them with fire. But that's not the only power they have. Verse 6, they have the power to shut the sky that no rain may fall during the days of their prophesying, and they have the power over the waters to turn them into blood and to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they desire, whenever they want to. They can turn water to blood. They can bring all these plagues that we've seen so far. It says even they have the power to stop the rain. And Elijah had that same power. He was given that same authority to stop the rain from falling. But it says here they can stop it for the entire time that they prophesy, for 3.5 years. Does it not rain for 3.5 years? I don't know. Maybe. But it says they have the power to do that during their entire ministry. They turn water into blood. Notice the things that are going on here, the things that they have the power to do, are the things that we saw in the sealed judgments. So who do you think is going to be getting blamed for all this stuff that's going on? Verse 7, and when they have finished their testimony, the beast that rise from the bottomless pit will make war on them, conquer them, and kill them. Up until this point, everyone has been trying to kill them because all their foes are coming after them, right? And we don't have to, it's not a stretch of the imagination to see that. These foes are coming after them, but they're protected by God. Until when? Until they have finished their testimony. And listen, it's no different for you and me. God has given us a job to do. God has given us a work to do. And until that time is complete, we're protected. And we don't know what that is, though, right? I mean, we don't know how long that's going to be. But we will do the work that God has given us to do. Now, again, we don't tempt God. We don't say, all right, God, my time's not up yet, and I'm going to try to prove you wrong. Those are ungodly things to do. But God has given us a job to do. So we should do that job. And we'll be protected as long as He has us protected. Because He is in complete control. Just the way He is here. When they have finished their testimony, so at the end of the 1260 days, the beast, now, get used to seeing the word the beast. 36 times in the book of Revelation, the beast is mentioned. This is the first one. So 35 more times we're going to see this beast mentioned. So who is he? He rises from the bottomless pit. We talked about before, the bottomless pit is hell. Not the lake of fire, but the place now where the holding place of the dead is of those evil spirits, of those who die without faith. The bottomless pit, the place that Jesus went to proclaim His victory over death after He was crucified. That's where this beast comes from. This beast is the Antichrist, and we'll see more about that as we continue. Like I said, you're going to see him 35 more times mentioned. But now, he is going to make war on them. Now, all these other people have made war on them because they've been blamed for all this bad stuff that's going on, and they haven't been able to do anything. They've been burned up with fire. But now the beast makes war on them, and what happens then? He conquers them and kills them. At the end of their testimony, when their time is up, they are killed by the Antichrist. In verse 8, their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city that is symbolically called Sodom and Egypt, where the Lord was crucified. So they're going to lay there in the street. They're not going to be buried. There are people that are going to say, we can't bury them, leave them in the street, desecrate their bodies. In this great city that's symbolically called Sodom and Egypt, we don't have to guess what that city is because it's where our Lord was crucified. It says that. This is Jerusalem. So they are in Jerusalem. It seems that they are at the temple. That would make sense. They're with the Lord of the earth. That's where God has measured out this area, this temple where the sacrifice is going on. So they are there at the temple. They are at Jerusalem. And it seems to be that they are the ones protecting Israel in their worship. Because foes are coming against them, and they have the ability to consume them with fire. Symbolically, Jerusalem is called Sodom. Sodom in the Old Testament was a city of great depravity. You know the story. Then it's also called Egypt. Egypt was where idolatry was introduced to Israel. So we see now that Jerusalem has become a wicked, idolatrous place. That it's called Sodom and Egypt. And that's where they are. That's where they're going to be killed. That is the central location of what's going on now. Verse 9, for 3.5 days, some from the peoples and tribes and languages and nations will gaze at their bodies and refuse to let them be placed in the tomb. My version says some, your version may say all. The point is that there are people from every tribe, every language, and nation seeing this happen. 100 years ago, that wasn't possible. Now you see things that go on immediately, right? So now we can look at this and say, oh, this is real. So people around the world are seeing what's going on here. They're looking at their dead bodies, and they refuse to let them be buried. And those who dwell on the earth, again, we've talked about that term over and over again. That is unbelievers that live in the world. Their response is they will rejoice over them and make merry and exchange presents. This is ridiculous, right? This is like Christmas, Easter, and Thanksgiving, July 4th all rolled into one. The whole world is going to be giving presents to one another because these two prophets died. This is how important this is. They were making havoc for the entire world. Everyone hated them and wanted them to die. And they were so excited when they were dead that they start giving presents to one another, calling it Dead Prophets Day or something. And they're laying in the street for 3.5 days. Why 3.5 days? I don't know. No idea. That's how long God wanted them to lay there in the street. 3.5 days. They're going to make merry and exchange presents because these two prophets had been a torment to those who dwell on the earth. They had been tormenting the people who were not believers. But after 3.5 days, the breath of life from God entered their bodies and they stood up on their feet. God really just understates things, doesn't he? They've been dead for 3.5 days. These guys that had power to breathe fire, they've been laying in the street for 3.5 days, and now we see the breath of life of God entered them and they stood up. Can you imagine standing there, looking at them, celebrating, and like, yay, the prophets, they're getting up! Can you imagine that? And the response of people is horror. And you can imagine. Because they finally got what they wanted. These prophets are dead, so they can't wreak havoc on the world anymore, but now they're back. And probably mad, I would think, that you killed them. It wouldn't make sense. But after 3.5 days, the breath of life God came, and they stood up on their feet, and great fear fell on those who saw them. Can you imagine? They're back. Stronger, probably. More powerful than ever. Then they heard, and this is the two prophets, they heard a loud voice from heaven saying, come up here. And they went up to heaven in a cloud, and their enemies watched them. They're taken to heaven. They hear this voice. We don't know if it's God or Jesus or an angel. Somebody with authority, probably God or Jesus. Come up here to the prophets, commanding them. And they go up into the clouds, and their enemies are watching. What have we done now? We have messed up bad. And they went up to heaven in the cloud, and their enemies watched them. And at that hour there was a great earthquake, and 1/10 of the city fell. 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake, and the rest were terrified and gave glory to God of heaven. Listen, a great earthquake, another one. We've seen many of these things. Another earthquake happens, but let's look at the response here. Look what happens. 1/10 of the city falls. 7,000 people were killed. And we're in Jerusalem now, the city of Israel. The temple's still there. It's sitting there. All these things are still going on. 1/10 of the city fell. And what is the response of the ones that are left? Not to curse God. They were terrified, and they gave glory to God. Here we see the beginning of the restoration of Israel. Again, in my understanding, in my belief about what the Bible teaches. And everybody is watching this, seeing this happen. The second woe has passed. Behold, the third woe is soon to come. Can you imagine? Again, all these things have happened. The people see these things happen, and they think, surely this is the end. Surely we've had enough. Even though they're cursing God. Then they hear, the second woe has passed. You're only 2/3 of the way through the woes. And you still got all the bowls to be poured out. and it's soon to come. There's still 1,260 days left. And then again, these things are not happening simultaneously all at once. They're spread out over a period of time. But we keep seeing 1,260 days, 3.5 years, 42 months, and we'll see it again in chapter 12. It keeps talking about those times to give us clues that these things are happening in a period of time. So why do we care about these things? Why is this important to us? This week, many of you saw the horror that happened in Uvalde, Texas. I didn't watch. I was told. Honestly, I can't handle it. If I'm honest, that's cowardly of me maybe, but I know what happened. I can't take it. And then the response, every politician comes out. Here's the problem, and here's how we fix it. Every one of them, they have an answer. And listen, I'm not political. They're not going to fix it. I believe some of them have some pretty good ideas, and quite frankly, I think some of them have some stupid ideas. But they're not going to solve the problem. The world looks at a situation like that and says, politician, come fix the problem. Take away the sin. They can't do it. They promise over and over. And many of you have been alive a lot longer than me. And I've seen every time a president runs, he says, these are the problems, I'm going to fix them. What do? Nothing. They try. Honestly, I can't stand politicians, but I honestly believe most of them in their heart want to fix these problems. I think they really do. But they can't do it. And the world looks to people like that and says, solve the problems for me. These people who had their children taken from them. Who can solve this problem? Who can take this away? They all make promises, but don't put your hope in them. Now, listen, I'm patriotic. I love living in the United States. I think it's the greatest country in the world. But listen, nobody is ever going to be my king until Jesus comes back. They can make promises and I can support them and I can vote for them and all these different things, but they are not going to take away the problems. It might get better for a little while and it's going to go right back to where it was. My hope is in the return of my King. When the world looks at them and says, fix our problems, we should support fixing problems. I'm all for that. But our hope is not in that. Our hope is in Jesus, because one day He is going to come back. Whether you believe it's at a premillennial, amillennial, postmillennial, whenever, He's coming. He's coming. And when He does, there's not going to be any more abortion. There's not going to be any more adoption. There's not going to be any more foster care. There's not going to be hospitals, cancer, abuse, pornography, wars, school shootings, stress, struggle, marriage issues that we have. There's not going to be counselors that have to go help you work through your problems. There's not going to be politicians. There's not going to be broken promises, greed. All these things that we struggle with every day. There's not going to be police and prison and starvation and famine and plague. And no politician's going to bring that, ever. The only one that's going to bring that is Jesus. And when He comes, He's going to bring that. So the reason it all matters is that even after our souls are secure, there's a whole world out there of lost and dying people that don't know Jesus. And they don't have a place to put their hope. And I do what I do because I believe that God has given us a message to take out into the world. I believe that there's hope for them. When we see things like that happen this week, as horrible as it was, there's hope. To me, it just reiterates the fact that we can't put our hope in the world, that my hope is in Jesus. Their hope is in broken men and broken institutions, and it's never going to solve their problems. It's always going to fail. Always. Don't put your hope there. Bow your heads and close your eyes. When we come here We don't come here to play church. We don't come here to do programs. We don't come here to give motivational speeches. We come here in order that we might have a closer relationship with God, in order that we might love one another, in order that we might show the love of Christ. And the way that we can do that is by learning what the Bible teaches, knowing who God is, and taking that message to the lost and dying world. And my prayer is that there's an impact made, that there's knowledge gained, and by that knowledge, a closer relationship with Jesus, a greater understanding of who He is, and a greater desire to see your neighbor saved. Because when we see the horrors that go on in this world, when we see children abused, when we see school shootings, when we see cancer, starvation, neglect, abuse, it should tear us up inside. But there's coming a day when that's all going to be gone. And that's where my hope is. That's why I'm here. That's why I do this. That's why I care. That's why it matters. God, thank you so much. Thank you for saving us. We don't know what your plan is. We don't know all the answers. We don't know why bad things happen to good people. Lord, come quickly. That's our prayer, God. Take away the sin of the world. When John saw you, he said, "Behold the Lamb that takes away the sin of the world." That's the only place we can put our hope. We pray for these families, these children, these teachers in Texas. We cannot imagine the horror. Give them hope. Put people in their life that can show them hope. Help us to be better witnesses. Help us to be more like you. Give us strength. Give us courage. Give us compassion and give us love. Take us out into the world with the message that you've given us. And all these things we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. You'll stand.